I'm curious, like when you think about, especially with more, I think over the last quarter, especially, but all of the generative AI and AI generally, and ML has always been around. But when you look at some of these emerging trends in AI, any thoughts on, how that's going to impact growth marketing generally?
I think it's still early days.
Yeah.
I do think, like, if we just look at the history, and I think you just said it, like ML's been around for a long time. I think that was a big change that UA already had to go through, which was, if you remember, the early days of UA was very granular, set up hundreds of campaigns and, two or, 3 to 5 different creative for each of those campaigns. And then in 2017, 2018, Facebook and Google really started rolling out with the ML campaigns, which meant less work, set up one campaign for each geo or sets of geo with 50 creative. And so we've started to see that, work operations change. And I think AI is just going to be an extension of that to some extent. And probably the biggest impact is going to be around creative in the near term. And so I think this both will happen from a production standpoint, in that AI, in theory, and we're starting to already see this, should be able to rebuild creative from elements that are already successful. But I also think from an ideation standpoint, so I've seen this with our teams a bit, is that artists will use AI for ideation, right? So let's throw in some ideas and see what the AI comes back with. And that helps us form ideas around what type of avatar items we might want to bring into the game.
Yeah.
And so probably creative is the first place. I think the second place would be strategy. I think there's no reason why AI can't help you come up with a global game launch plan. I haven't tried it, but it'd be interesting to put that in the chat GPT and see what it comes back with. And I think over time.
Well, I think you could feed in things that you've done in the past. I mean, I think, you mentioned the ideation, the value add there, which is no small thing. I think for any creator, especially if you've been working on a few titles or a few products, like at some point, there's only so many ways you can show your dog food, right? Or whatever that might be. And so the ability for generative AI to just crank out 100 concepts and you're like, oh, that's a cool concept.
Yeah.
I'm going to take those 3 and now I've got work for the next week. Like, I don't want that because the hands are all messed up or any number of other things, but like, that's a cool look. Or no, less like that. Or here's like you mentioned, like, here's a bunch of art that has been working. It's been performant. Can you give me some other examples of stuff that kind of looks like this? Because I'm like all out and it's like, oh, cool. Yeah. Change the foreground or the depth of field or any number of things that drive that. And so I think from and we're still early days. So when you look at some of the generative stuff on campaign planning or even like a full global launch that says, oh, here's like a real world, like live event that you could do where helicopters are going to come in and it's like, okay, like, sure, why not? Because I think you can have it crank 50 things at a time in like less than a minute. Yeah. And right now we might shrug at some of it and be like, it's so, but it's so early. So when you think about like how quickly this progresses, you take, because the curve of acceleration on this is way higher. So you take like gaming as an example generally with Pong from, early 70s, and you look at where we are now, that's taken, call it 40, 50 years roughly from where we've been. This acceleration is way faster. So like we're going to see a shift from like Pong level quality to current level graphics in, Call of Duty or something like that.
Yeah.
That's probably going to be more like a 3 to 5 year span of that difference in quality. And so the idea that it will at least be able to spit out the ideations of things that then humans can kind of sort through or piecemeal together seems very realistic in a short amount of time.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think you're spot on. And I think another interesting area, because I work at Rec Room and we have like a lot of creators that are building games with our internal tools. I think another area that's really exciting for this stuff that we're just starting to look at is on the UGC creation side. And an analogy I'll use is the music industry. So when I started playing music in high school, like you had to go into a real recording studio to record. And, that was very time consuming and get like musicians. And then obviously the drum machines have been around for a long time, but everyone was scared that was going to kill the drummer. It didn't, but it opened up the music to a lot more people. And then the recording tools over time and the samples and everything got so much better that now a lot of top artists just record, and high school kids record everything in their rooms, right? Yeah. And so I think generative AI has the ability to do that for making games and making content. And it's going to democratize really and level the playing field. So we're going to get a lot more content, just like in music that's crap, but there's always going to be diamonds in the rough that rise to the top. So,
and we talked about this the other day. Were you a drummer, by the way? Is
No,
that
I was guitarist and a bassist.
you're in
Yeah.
guitar and bass? So we talked about that, and it's an interesting parallel between, I don't know if it's Ableton or things like that for drum. I
Yeah.
don't know what it is mainly
Reason,
for
a different
drums. Yeah,
one.
Reason, but the and people thinking in these early days that it's going to like completely degrade the art. Very similar parallels with digital photography, where everybody's like, well, nobody should be a photographer anymore because the cameras are taking such great pictures now, or Photoshop makes it so easy to like dodge and burn that, that's just dark rooms are dead and all this. And it's like, yeah, dark rooms were dead, but that didn't kill the art of photography. If anything, it accelerated it and it raised that bar to where if everybody can like really quickly make a photo that one, they can take a photo, instantly get feedback, be like, nope, that's not right. Make all their changes, take another photo, be like, yep, that looks more or less right. Get it into a digital darkroom and quickly make these changes without any chemicals or any sort of like hours long process where to get from, like, I have an idea to here's the image that's going to go on the billboard was taking multiple weeks with multiple rounds in the dark rooms and iterations and all these things because it was so slow.
Yeah.
Now all that can be done in like 10 minutes. Well, we might as well just walk away. It's like, well, yeah, if you're going to live in a dark room and if you're going to live in a world where you only play beats on a drum, but why would I do that when I have a perfectly fine snare here and 50 other snares I can hit? So it makes it more accessible. It raises the bar. So like what was great yesterday, if the generative stuff can just crank out ideas just as fast, it just shifts the focus of like where the value creation is. And so like the general premise of leveraging those tools early and often to essentially master them, and you can, you're not going to be in a situation where AI has suddenly replaced you because you've been leveraging AI even when it wasn't that great, even when Reason or Ableton wasn't that great, even when digital cameras weren't that great. It's like if you got really good at that stuff for photography, let's say in 1998, you were an expert by 2005 because that's when commercially they started becoming really interesting. So I think there's some parallels there.
Yeah. Great analogy.
So, any other kind of additional thoughts on like the future of paid acquisition specifically, whether it's in AI or, some of these kind of surrounding disciplines that kind of help offset some of the changes in the PII side?
Yeah, I mean, it's not going away, right?
Yeah.
And so I think it goes back to some of the things I said earlier. It can't be your only strategy for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
You really need to be thinking about kind of a 360 model. And just to give some examples of that, at Rec Room, we have what we call we have like basically a roster of influencers that can put in creator codes and earn money when players that follow them play the game. And so this is basically like a fairly large group of very devoted content creators that love Rec Room that are marketing for us. And, and we give them early access to like these marketing beats, and they're under embargo. And then the moment the beat hits, all their videos come out and it helps drive awareness. And so it's like having strategies like that can really help amplify and take the pressure off paid UA that you'll need. And it's really, God forbid a performance guy ever says this, but building the brand, like I know some people are like, brands are bullshit, but it really is that to some extent, at least building trust, building authenticity, and building like understanding what resonates with your audience, and then making sure you're leveraging everything that you can to do that so that over time your reliance on paid lessons, and otherwise it's going to be very hard to survive.
Well, and things like, essentially, what you described there with influencers, kind of like an advanced referral program, right? Where it's eat what you kill. You're doing something you already want to do anyways, or something that you believe in, but like you might as well monetize your influence within this program, and you win, they win. And it's like even more compounding in like a gaming setup versus I'm going to refer people to Sweet Greens, use code 605 on Sweet Greens to save $50 on your next order, whatever that might be. It's very different when you're actually participating in a community like that. And, on the brand side of things, same thing. It's like bad brand is bad and people roll their eyes at it, but so is bad performance marketing and people roll their eyes at that. And so is bad SEO. And there's a million people that do bad SEO, right? And so I think it really is a matter of, it just speaks to the value of that specialization within that and teams working together, like you mentioned. And so I think for so long, because of the nature of, or the lack of regulation in things like paid media with Facebook, Google, et cetera, and those algorithms getting really great, you could actually build an entire business on, if you had a good product, you could build it by just like cranking the button on Facebook. And like that actually worked for a few years
Oh yeah,
between, in the mid
for a
2000
long time.
teens. Yeah, yeah. And
Yeah.
then that slowly started to kind of fade away a little bit. But even back then, and we talk about this a lot now, which is kind of funny, which is like, imagine if people took the level of the like seriousness by which we think about things more holistically now back then, which people were still touting back then, but it's like how much more efficient would that have been? And really great products can still survive that to some sense, but you're always leaving stuff on the table if you're just kind of punching. Even back then, if you're just punching the button on Facebook, Google, or paid, you're leaving stuff on the table one way or the other.
Yeah, and I think what a lot of execs from that time got addicted to measurement, and it was really hard to measure the other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And you either had to have faith or you didn't have faith. And the folks that had faith kind of benefit from it now, I feel like, and you can see that in certain companies. And the folks that didn't have faith, they don't have any brand to really stand on.
Yeah.
One other interesting thing, just tying back like the influencers to paid, is that our demographic is teenagers, and our influencers make all of our UA ads, and they are top performing UA ads by a mile
because they know the audience.
Understand exactly. And so it's been a great resource for us, and one that's been very different than other companies I've been at, where it's really about the marketing artist driving the best performing content.
Well, and that authenticity is so important, and kind of living and breathing it, where it's like, that doesn't make sense to me, and I love this thing. And it's one of those things where, in order to really get something and understand something from a marketing standpoint, you really have to like live and breathe it and love it. And because of just the nature of work, you don't always like live and breathe the product that you're working on, which goes back to the importance of speaking with your customer, getting the data that just shows us like, okay, well, everybody spends very little time on this thing, and they are all in on this thing, even though the product teams and other teams internally are really trying to push this thing because we think it's going to do this thing, and maybe it will and maybe it won't. But we built it without talking to the customer, so it's no surprise nobody's using it, or it's not being surfaced in a way that makes sense in the flow and in the way that the user is using it versus the way we want them to use it.
Mm-hmm.
And so those types of things, especially at scale, are kind of never ending. And I think that going back to the customer, having a closer connectivity to your users, and really understanding the path that people are taking. There's these things called, I can't remember what they're called. I think they're called desire paths, and there's a whole subreddit about this, which is a really kind of a funny thing when you hear what a desire path is. And we've all seen them. They're very common on college campuses, where you have the sidewalks that are paved, and then you have these like beaten paths of where people actually walk. You see it all the time, like through bushes or something, not necessarily on a college campus, but it's like anytime there's a really well-worn path through something, that's a desire path. And the Reddit subreddit is such a niche thing, but it's like, that's the thing, which is like, there are the paths you build, and then there are the paths that people are actually taking. And how do you find those desire paths within your product, within your onboarding, or whatever that might be, so that you can kind of better set up users for success in a way that makes more sense for the ways that they want to use it. And I think the UGC side and what you guys are doing at Rec Room give you all of this additional data, where that is like at the forefront. It's like Rec Room without the users doesn't really exist. And so they're kind of building the product alongside you guys, and you're just kind of in some ways, and correct me if I'm wrong, but like you're ultimately facilitating the world that these people want to create and live in and experience.
Yeah, I love that example of desire path, because that really resonates with me, because I think if there's one job of a product team, it's to kind of remove obstructions to those desire paths, because it's not always evident. And what you think is going to work doesn't, as we know very well in the UA world, rarely ever works. So
yes, because you have all your own preconceptions, you have all of your own filters and things, and just average people, just by the very definition of an average person, it's very unlikely that you're going to be perfectly average, right? You're going to swing too far this way or too far this way. Or in the case of things like a slots game, a mobile slots game, it's like, if you're not a deep mobile slots player, you can't possibly understand why people want to play that. And so when you look at some ad that's really flashy and lights and crazy, and you're like, oh my God, that's never going to work. And then it works. You're like, oh, that's because people play slots because they like the lights, they like the music, they like all of those things that maybe might turn somebody off. We were talking about it the other day, which is like, if you're ever getting an ad over, and this, no news to you, but if you're ever getting an ad over and over and over again that you think is like the worst, most annoying ad ever, and you hear people say this all the time, like, oh my God, I hate that ad. I see that ad all the time. I hate that ad. It's like, that ad's working. That ad is converting.
Yeah.
So, or the company's about to go out of business because they're not tracking it. But like odds are, if you're seeing something over and over, especially over the course of many months, it's because it's working better than any other ad. And that's where, and I think your point on measurement earlier, where the ability to measure paid in that way, it's no wonder that so many people gravitate towards that because they have a chance to understand it and have some sense of predictability or control that may or may not be actualized, but they at least feel that way, where you lose. It's less connected to things like product marketing or more nuanced kind of elements of growth.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'm curious, like you've spent a ton of time in growth in these various roles. I'm curious, like any stories you've got that you might want to highlight about just like, I don't know, kind of something that maybe revealed something that was unexpected or just a general story. A lot of our listeners are founders or, senior members of growth teams at larger orgs. So these stories are always interesting. Anything that comes to mind there?
Yeah. Well, I think like it's kind of walk through the Jam City model, if you will, because we were really a performance marketing machine, and it was all about identifying games that we could scale where the studios either didn't have the resources or the sophistication to do it themselves. And so probably like our biggest kind of success here, well, there's several, but Disney, which has a long history of getting in and out of the gaming business, they every 5 years decide they want to get back into it, and every 5 years they decide they want to get out of it. So we were on the tail end of them deciding to get out of it, and they had this game called Disney Emoji Blitz, which was a match 3 game with emoji Disney characters that you could then also get a keyboard in your phone that had all the emojis, Disney emojis. And this game was doing about 35-40 million a year, and we acquired the game and the studio, and we're able to scale that to about 80 to 100 million a year with no change other than marketing. And really what we did over that time was like probably 3 major areas where first one was just data. It was just like, let's really get our analytics in and understand what the LTV of these users look like, what the trajectory of those LTVs look like. And we didn't do anything for the first year. We basically just kind of like let it be and waited until we had enough data. The second one.
And when you say didn't do anything for the first year, and tying that back into your previous point of, essentially doubled their revenue to around 100 million without changing anything outside of the marketing. Given that you didn't do anything in the first year, does that mean there was no real marketing happening in that year, no buying, no whatever, or didn't change anything for the first year and they were just still running like nothing had ever changed?
I should say we kept it steady.
Steady. Okay.
We kept the UA budget, somewhere, in like the 6 figures.
Sure.
And just kept it kind of where it was when Disney had it.
Okay.
And
so observed for a year and kind of.
And what I should say was that at that time, Disney was fixated on a 1-year payback. So basically we were like, okay, let's keep the budget where it is. We'll get the 1-year payback. And so kind of use that 1 year to really capture a lot of analytics, testing. I think at this point we took over the game and we start testing new campaigns, testing, with our existing match 3 catalog, we kind of knew, what to go ahead and just launch.
Yeah.
And then on the creative side, we ran, a very long 6-month to 8-month creative testing process to kind of get everything in place. And so these are all things that, Disney wasn't really doing. Yep. And then once all that was in place, we started scaling.